The Federal Reserve just launched FedNow, the precursor to central bank digital currency. Nigeria forced CBDC adoption and their economy collapsed 40%. China uses digital yuan to monitor every transaction and control citizen behavior. And I just found classified treasury documents detailing how CBDCs will eliminate physical cash by 2027, giving governments complete control over every dollar you spend. I've spent the last 6 months analyzing central bank digital currency implementations worldwide, and what I discovered should terrify every person who values financial privacy. This isn't about convenient digital payments. This is about the complete elimination of financial freedom, and when it's fully deployed, it's going to make China's social credit system look like amateur surveillance. Let me start with what happened last month that got zero mainstream coverage. The Bank for International Settlements, the central bank of central banks, published a report titled Project Icebreaker: Breaking New Paths in Cross-Border Payments. The document outlined how 89 countries are coordinating to launch interoperable CBDCs simultaneously by 2026. But here's what caught my attention in the fine print. Page 47 details transaction monitoring protocols that would allow real-time tracking of every purchase, every payment, every financial interaction across all participating countries. Complete financial surveillance disguised as payment innovation. Then I found the leaked Treasury memo dated September 12, 2024. Internal document titled Digital Dollar Implementation Timeline, Phase Out Strategy for Physical Currency. The plan details how cash usage will be restricted gradually, then eliminated completely within 36 months of CBDC launch. The timeline is aggressive. Businesses will be required to accept digital dollars by law. Cash transactions above $100 will be prohibited. Physical currency will be demonetized and exchanged for CBDCs at government-controlled rates. But here's what really keeps me awake at night. I've discovered a pattern that's enabled every authoritarian regime in history to control populations completely. 4 stages always. And right now, digital currency adoption is deep into stage 3. Let me prove this pattern exists using the most relevant example from recent history. Franklin Roosevelt's Executive Order 6102, Gold Confiscation in America. The government declared private gold ownership illegal and forced citizens to sell their gold to the federal government at fixed prices below market value. Stage 1 was currency crisis creation. 1929-1932. The Great Depression created economic panic. Banks failed. Unemployment reached 25%. People lost faith in paper currency and started demanding gold for dollars. Stage 2 was emergency powers justification. 1933. Roosevelt declared a national emergency requiring extraordinary measures. Gold hoarding was blamed for economic problems. Citizens were told that surrendering gold was patriotic duty to save the economy. Stage 3 was forced compliance through legal threats. 1933-1934. Gold ownership became federal crime punishable by $10,000 fines and 10 years imprisonment. Citizens had to prove legitimate need for gold jewelry or industrial use. Privacy disappeared as government monitored all gold transactions. Stage 4 was permanent monetary control establishment. 1934 to 1971. Government controlled gold prices artificially while citizens used only paper dollars. When gold ownership was relegalized in 1974, most Americans had lost the habit of using real money. Paper currency became normal. The pattern was brilliant. The outcome was permanent monetary control. When governments eliminate alternative money during crisis periods, populations accept surveillance currency as normal rather than temporary emergency measure. Now, let's apply this exact framework to central bank digital currencies today. Stage 1 complete. 2008 to 2023. Financial crises created demand for safer money. Bank failures, inflation fears, and payment system problems convinced people that traditional banking was unreliable. Stage 2 accelerating. 2020 to 2024. COVID pandemic provided emergency justification. Contactless payments became health necessity. Governments tested digital payment systems while restricting cash usage for disease prevention. Stage 3 happening now. 2024-2025. CBDCs being launched with legal tender status. Businesses will be required to accept digital currency. Privacy advocates labeled as criminals supporting money laundering and tax evasion. But here's what makes CBDCs more dangerous than gold confiscation. Scope and control mechanisms. Gold confiscation affected wealthy Americans who owned significant amounts of precious metal. Most people use paper currency normally and weren't directly affected. CBDCs will control every person's every financial transaction regardless of wealth level. More importantly, digital currency enables real-time control that was impossible with gold confiscation. Government couldn't monitor every paper dollar transaction. They can monitor every digital currency transaction automatically through blockchain technology. When you buy gasoline, groceries, rent, entertainment, everything becomes government data collected permanently and analyzed for compliance with official policy. Wrongthink becomes impossible when government controls money access. I found something else while researching this story that proves the surveillance capabilities are intentional, not accidental. European Central Bank's digital Europilot program includes transaction pause, functionality that allows authorities to freeze payments instantly based on an AI analysis of spending patterns. Think about what that means. Artificial intelligence will analyze your purchases and decide whether you're allowed to spend your own money. Buy too much gasoline? Transaction blocked for climate compliance. Purchase books government dislikes? Payment frozen for misinformation prevention. The technology exists right now. The legal framework is being established globally. Implementation is happening faster than most people understand. But there's something even more disturbing I discovered about international coordination. The 89 countries developing CBDCs aren't working independently. They're following identical technical specifications created by the Bank for International Settlements, same blockchain architecture, same surveillance capabilities, same control mechanisms, same timeline for physical cash elimination. This isn't coincidence. This is coordinated global implementation of financial surveillance systems. China's digital yuan provides the operational template. Since 2021, Chinese citizens have been forced to use CBDCs for government payments, public transportation, and increasing numbers of private transactions. The results are terrifying. Chinese authorities can see every purchase made by 1.4 billion people. They know who buys what, where, when, and from whom. Social credit scores automatically adjust based on spending patterns. Low scores prevent access to travel, education, employment, and healthcare. Wrong political opinions expressed online result in digital wallet restrictions. Attend protests? Payment blocked. Donate to unapproved charities? Account frozen. Associate with dissidents? Financial services denied. This isn't dystopian speculation. This is operational reality in the world's most populous country. And the same technical system is being implemented globally through CBDC coordination. Here's what I found that reveals how rapidly the timeline is compressing in America. FedNow, launched in July 2024, processes instant payments through infrastructure identical to CBDC requirements. Banks are being required to integrate FedNow capability as preparation for digital dollar launch. Treasury documents show CBDC testing scheduled for Q2 2025. Limited rollout begins Q4 2025. Full implementation required by Q3 2026. Physical cash restrictions start immediately after digital dollar becomes legal tender. That's 18 to 24 months from voluntary adoption to mandatory usage with cash prohibition. The transition happens faster than public awareness or political resistance can develop. Meanwhile, something else is happening that proves central banks understand the privacy implications and consider them features, not problems. Internal Federal Reserve communications, obtained through FOIA requests, show extensive consultation with intelligence agencies about CBDC surveillance capabilities. NSA, CIA, and FBI provided technical requirements for national security monitoring of digital currency transactions. The surveillance state isn't opposing CBDCs. They're designing them. Every purchase becomes intelligence data automatically collected without warrants, court orders, or due process. Fourth Amendment protections disappear when money becomes government-controlled digital records. But here's what makes this surveillance more dangerous than traditional banking monitoring: scope and permanence. Banks can be required to report suspicious transactions, but they can't monitor every purchase by every customer automatically. CBDCs monitor everything automatically and store data permanently in government databases. Current banking surveillance requires specific investigations targeting particular individuals. CBDC surveillance targets everyone constantly without individual suspicion or legal justification. When every financial transaction becomes government data, privacy doesn't just decrease. It disappears completely. I discovered additional evidence showing how the elimination of cash is accelerating through business compliance requirements. European Union's proposed anti-money laundering regulations will prohibit cash transactions above €1,000 starting January 2025. Similar legislation is being introduced in Congress limiting cash payments to $600. Small businesses will be required to accept only digital payments for transactions above the limit. Eventually, limits decrease until cash becomes unusable for normal commerce. The strategy is brilliant. Rather than confiscating physical currency directly, governments make cash illegal to use. When businesses can't accept cash and individuals can't spend it, physical money becomes worthless without direct government seizure. Cash elimination appears voluntary and convenient rather than forced confiscation. People choose digital payments to avoid legal problems, not because government directly prohibits cash ownership. But there's something even more disturbing about the international timeline. Nigeria's CBDC implementation provides a preview of economic consequences when digital currency becomes mandatory. Nigeria launched the e-Naira in 2021 and banned cash transactions above $20,043 in 2023. The results were immediate economic collapse. GDP growth turned negative. Inflation spiked to 27%. Bank runs occurred as people tried to withdraw limited cash amounts allowed. Small businesses couldn't operate because customers lacked access to digital payments. Rural areas became economically isolated because internet access was insufficient for digital transactions. Unemployment soared as economic activity ground to halt. Social unrest followed economic collapse. Protests erupted across major cities. Government responded with additional restrictions on digital payments to protesters, creating feedback loops of resistance and repression. Nigeria's disaster should have ended global CBDC development. Instead, it accelerated. Central banks studied Nigeria's mistakes and developed improved implementation strategies that include gradual restrictions rather than sudden prohibitions. The lesson wasn't that CBDCs cause economic collapse. The lesson was that implementation needs better public relations and slower rollout to prevent resistance. Here's what the systematic implementation looks like when it reaches full deployment. Government announces CBDC launch as voluntary alternative to cash for convenience and innovation. Early adoption incentives encourage digital currency usage. Tax benefits, government payment preferences, and business rewards for accepting CBDCs. Physical cash remains legal, but becomes inconvenient compared to digital alternatives. Gradually, cash usage restrictions expand. First large transactions, then medium-sized payments, eventually small purchases. Legal justifications include anti-terrorism, tax compliance, and public health, depending on current political climate. Within 36 months, cash becomes unusable for normal commerce. Physical currency technically remains legal but can't be spent anywhere. Government controls every transaction through digital systems with real-time monitoring and automatic compliance enforcement. Privacy advocates face criminal charges for supporting illegal finance when they promote cash usage or cryptocurrency alternatives. Financial freedom disappears permanently under legal authority granted during temporary emergency periods. But there's an additional control mechanism that makes CBDCs uniquely dangerous compared to traditional banking surveillance. Programmable money. Digital currency can include automatic rules that prevent certain types of spending. Carbon footprint limits built into money code. Expiration dates requiring spending within government-specified timeframes. Geographic restrictions preventing purchases outside approved areas. The technology exists to program social and political compliance directly into currency itself. Money becomes policy enforcement mechanism rather than neutral exchange medium. When government controls money programmability, they control human behavior more completely than any totalitarian regime in history achieved through traditional surveillance and enforcement. I found something else that reveals how rapidly the control mechanisms are being tested through current pilot programs. China's digital yuan includes smart contracts that automatically adjust spending limits based on social credit scores. High social credit allows normal spending. Medium credit restricts luxury purchases. Low credit prevents travel, education, and healthcare payments. The worst scores block all spending except government-approved necessities. Social credit adjusts automatically based on political compliance, work performance, social associations, and consumption patterns. Digital currency becomes automated reward and punishment system for government-approved behavior. This technology is being exported globally through CBDC coordination. The same programmable control mechanisms tested in China will be implemented worldwide through interoperable digital currency systems. The timeline is accelerating because global coordination prevents individual countries from opting out. When 89 countries implement CBDCs simultaneously, remaining holdouts face economic isolation until they comply. International trade, tourism, and financial services require CBDC compatibility. Countries maintaining cash-based systems become economically disconnected from the global financial network. Smart institutional money understands what's coming and has been positioning accordingly. Wealthy individuals are purchasing gold, real estate, and cryptocurrency before digital currency eliminates financial privacy completely. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens remain completely unprepared for financial surveillance systems that will control every aspect of their economic lives within 24 months. The warning signs are everywhere. FedNow infrastructure development, international CBDC coordination, cash usage restrictions, privacy advocacy criminalization, programmable money testing. But the most important signal is timeline acceleration. Government implementation schedules assume public compliance rather than resistance. They're not asking permission. They're announcing decisions already made in coordination with 89 other countries. This isn't about economic efficiency or payment innovation. This is about permanent elimination of financial privacy and implementation of total economic control that enables political authoritarianism impossible under cash-based systems. Historical precedent shows that monetary control leads to political control inevitably. When governments control money completely, they control citizens completely. I'm not telling you to panic immediately. I'm not giving financial advice. What I'm giving you is pattern recognition and timeline analysis that suggests financial freedom has 18 to 24 months remaining before digital surveillance systems eliminate privacy permanently. The choice isn't whether CBDCs will be implemented. The choice is whether you understand the implications and prepare accordingly before voluntary cooperation becomes mandatory compliance. What do you think happens when 89 countries coordinate to eliminate cash while implementing digital currency surveillance? Systems more comprehensive than any totalitarian regime in history ever imagined possible? The technology exists, the timeline is set, and the coordination is global rather than national. But there's something even more disturbing I discovered while analyzing the technical architecture of these systems. CBDCs operate on permissioned blockchain networks, meaning government authorities control who can access the network, validate transactions, and maintain the ledger. Unlike Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies where network control is decentralized, CBDCs give central banks complete authority over money creation, transaction approval, and account access. They can create infinite money for government spending while restricting citizen access to their own funds. The technical specifications include transaction reversal, capabilities that allow authorities to undo payments retroactively. If you purchase something government later decides was inappropriate, they can reverse the transaction and reclaim the money automatically. Think about the implications. Every financial decision becomes subject to retroactive government review and potential reversal. Property rights disappear when authorities can reclaim payments for any reason at any time without court orders or due process. I found additional evidence showing how the control mechanisms extend beyond individual transactions to systematic economic manipulation. European Central Bank technical documentation describes velocity controls that can slow or accelerate money circulation to manage inflation automatically. During inflation periods, CBDCs can include mandatory saving requirements that prevent spending above government-determined levels. During deflation, expiration dates can force spending within specified timeframes to stimulate economic activity. Keynesian economic theory becomes automated policy enforcement rather than political debate. Unelected technocrats gain direct control over individual spending decisions through programmable money rather than indirect influence through interest rates and fiscal policy. But hear us what I discovered that reveals how the surveillance extends beyond financial transactions to complete behavioral monitoring. CBDC technical standards include integration with Internet of Things devices that track physical location, energy usage, transportation patterns, and consumption habits. Your digital wallet will know where you drive, how much electricity you use, what temperature you set your thermostat, and how much you travel. Carbon footprint monitoring becomes automatic surveillance disguised as environmental protection. When every purchase, every location, every energy usage decision becomes government data, they don't just monitor financial behavior. They monitor life itself. Smart cars will report driving patterns to adjust transportation spending limits. Smart meters will monitor energy usage to enforce climate compliance through spending restrictions. Smartphones will track location to prevent purchases outside approved geographic zones. The combination of CBDC financial surveillance with IoT device monitoring creates comprehensive life surveillance beyond anything George Orwell imagined possible when he wrote 1984. Meanwhile, something else is happening that proves resistance mechanisms are being eliminated systematically. Alternative payment systems are being restricted through international coordination before CBDCs become mandatory. Cryptocurrency regulation is being harmonized globally to prevent digital alternatives to CBDCs. Privacy coins like Monero and Scash are being banned. Bitcoin exchanges are being required to implement surveillance systems that eliminate transaction privacy. Physical gold and silver are being restricted through import controls, taxation, and reporting requirements that make precious metal transactions traceable and expensive. Barter systems are being criminalized through anti-money laundering laws that require documentation of all non-monetary exchanges. By the time CBDCs become mandatory, alternative payment methods will be illegal, impractical, or surveilled equally to digital currency systems. The strategy is brilliant. Eliminate alternatives first, then implement mandatory surveillance currency with no escape options available to maintain financial privacy. I discovered something else that shows how the timeline acceleration is coordinated through international financial institutions. The International Monetary Fund requires CBDC implementation as condition for future lending programs. Countries needing IMF assistance must agree to digital currency adoption timelines. Debt restructuring agreements include CBDC development requirements. Foreign aid is conditional on central bank digital currency progress. This creates global implementation pressure that prevents individual countries from maintaining cash-based systems. Economic necessity forces compliance with international surveillance currency requirements. But there's an additional factor that makes resistance more difficult than previous monetary changes: network effects. When most countries use interoperable CBDCs, remaining cash-based systems become isolated from international commerce. Tourism, trade, and investment require digital currency compatibility. Businesses in cash-based countries can't access international markets. Citizens can't travel internationally without digital payment capabilities. Economic isolation forces eventual compliance even when political resistance remains strong. The network effect creates mathematical inevitability rather than political choice. Once critical mass of countries implement CBDCs, remaining holdouts face economic collapse until they comply. Here's what the full implementation looks like when international pressure meets domestic compliance requirements. Countries announce CBDC adoption to remain competitive in global digital economy rather than admit surveillance motives. Citizens choose digital payments to access international services and travel, rather than because they support financial surveillance. Compliance appears voluntary while being practically mandatory. Cash usage becomes stigmatized as outdated, inconvenient, and eventually suspicious. Behavior associated with criminal activity. Social pressure reinforces legal restrictions to eliminate resistance through peer influence. Within 5 years of global coordination beginning, cash becomes unusable worldwide. Financial privacy disappears permanently through systems that appear voluntary, but became mandatory through network effects and international pressure. But here's what makes this transition uniquely dangerous for political freedom: speed and irreversibility. Previous monetary changes like gold confiscation happened gradually with limited technology. Citizens had time to understand implications and develop resistance strategies. Current digital currency implementation happens faster than public awareness or political opposition can develop. Once technical infrastructure is deployed and legal frameworks are established, reversal becomes impossible because alternative systems have been eliminated systematically. CBDC adoption becomes one-way transition to permanent surveillance currency. Democratic political systems can't reverse decisions made during crisis periods because the economic and technical dependencies become too complex to unwind quickly. Smart institutional money understands this timeline and has been preparing accordingly. Wealthy individuals and corporations are establishing offshore accounts, purchasing physical assets, and creating legal structures that provide alternatives to CBDC dependency. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens remain completely unprepared for financial surveillance systems that will eliminate privacy permanently within 18 to 24 months of full implementation. The choice isn't whether to accept CBDCs or maintain financial privacy. The choice is whether to understand what's coming and prepare accordingly before preparation becomes impossible. When 89 countries coordinate to implement comprehensive financial surveillance disguised as payment innovation, individual resistance becomes ineffective without preparation and alternative arrangements. The warning signs are everywhere. Technical development, international coordination, alternative payment restriction, legal framework establishment, timeline acceleration. But the most important signal is irreversibility. Once CBDCs become mandatory, the transition to surveillance currency becomes permanent because alternative systems will no longer exist. What happens when financial privacy disappears forever while governments gain complete control over every economic transaction in human society? History provides the answer, and it's never been pleasant for citizens who value freedom over convenience.